Chance here to go up by 2 possessions with 9:27. I think it's worth the chance.
Miami had to get the field goal block team off to get some pass rushers back on there. Here we go. Got to get to the 8. He's going to take off and run. Mendoza weaves his way first and goal. Diving toward the end zone. Touchdown! Where he won the Heisman Trophy.
One of the funniest things sports fans do, in my opinion, is comfort their wounded spirits in a disappointing season by assigning the term asterisk to the champion. For some reason, it is more common in NBA discourse than in other sports. Some of the funniest asterisks that I enjoy laughing at were the 2020 LeBron James Mickey Mouse title in the bubble, which I actually do think deserves an asterisk. That championship is bullshit. The 2012 LeBron-led Miami Heat championship, in which the season was shortened by a lockout. The 2016 LeBron-led championship, where Draymond was suspended. Wait a minute. Are asterisks just exclusively for LeBron James getting championships? I guess we'll have to dive deeper into that in another video. The point is that there are tons of factors that can influence fans of a sports season to dub the coronated champion as having an asterisk attached to their ring. To my surprise, the asterisk question is not so quickly recalled in the case of college football fans when they stroll down memory lane. Well, no more. Today we are going to be getting a history lesson and assigning an asterisk to every college football champion in the college football playoff era. In order to fairly grade the legitimacy of each asterisk assigned, I will use a meter to gauge the level of asterisks needed for each championship. The level of the meter from least severe to maximum severity will be only cope, viral on the message boards, SportsCenter headline, storm the CFP offices, and death penalty. If the NCAA governing bodies can assign death penalties to teams, we can certainly assign death penalties to a committee. The year is 2014, and fans are not satisfied by a computer deciding which college football teams get to play for the national championship. Thankfully, a bunch of people unwilling to change for nostalgic purposes and boomers that believed a newspaper ranking is the best way to rank the teams decided that only 4 teams every year get to play for the right to be called national champions. For the first ever college football playoff, the 4 teams that were granted an opportunity into the extremely exclusive and biased dance was the previous year's BCS national champion, Florida State Seminoles, the Pac-12 champion, Oregon Ducks, the SEC champion, Alabama Crimson Tide, and the Big Ten champion, Ohio State Buckeyes. Despite what the conference championship may communicate on the surface level to the viewer, this was not a clear-cut, no-doubt selection of teams. The team with the biggest gripe about their exclusion and the focus of our asterisk on the 2014 chip was the TCU Horned Frogs. Let's start off by looking at all the losses that our playoffs team suffered during the regular season. The eventual champion, Ohio State, suffered an absolutely horrible loss at the hands of the Virginia Tech Hokies. The Hokies would end their season with 6 losses to the likes of Wake Forest, East Carolina, Georgia Tech, and Pittsburgh. The game wasn't particularly close either, with the Hokies winning by 13 points with an interception to finish the game. Much else was going on around the team besides their devastating loss to the Hokies at selection time, but we'll cover more on that later. Already, the Buckeyes appear to be name and brand merchants on their inclusion of the playoff. The Oregon Ducks, the eventual opponents of the Buckeyes in the big game, took an early season loss to Arizona. However, the Ducks were able to redeem themselves in the Pac-12 championships as they beat Arizona with a no-doubt score. The Alabama Crimson Tide suffered a loss to a pretty strong Ole Miss opponent. Ole Miss only lost to a number 3 ranked Auburn and a number 24 LSU by the slimmest of margins. The loss to Ole Miss would hang over the Crimson Tide. It was a spooky asterisk ghost that haunted them for the reason that Ole Miss got bludgeoned by the Horned Frogs in their bowl game. More on that later. And finally, the Florida State Seminoles. The Seminoles were pretty much undeniably a playoff team, suffering no losses and some impressive regular season wins to go along with the cachet of being last year's champs. Looks like the committee only gets it right when Florida State goes undefeated. Wait a minute. Now we come to the drama and our big asterisk on the selection of our playoff teams. The exclusion of the TCU Horned Frogs. The Horned Frogs were not undefeated, just like most of the playoff teams that year. But Their loss was nowhere near the level of disaster as had been inflicted on the Buckeyes, and it was absolutely a less damaging loss than Ole Miss beating Alabama, because while the Tide lost by 6 to the Rebels, the Horned Frogs gave the Rebels the Nicky from Casino treatment by taking them out to a secluded area and pumping them with 42 points. TCU only lost by 1 point to the Baylor Bears because of some very questionable uncalled and then called pass interferences. The most hilarious part of this isn't even the resumes of the team. It was the fact that the playoff committee decided to allow Ohio State to compete despite being forced to play with their third-string QB. Apparently, everyone has quite short memories because that rule was not applied just 9 years later when the Florida State Seminoles went undefeated and were left out of a game because they were forced to play with their second-string QBs. Bias, anyone? There was an asterisk on the Buckeyes because they shouldn't have been in the playoff based on the circumstances. It should have been the Horned Frogs, who would have had a very good shot of upsetting the Crimson Tide. I'll give this a storm the CFP offices on the asterisk rating. 2015, we had all become pros. We knew exactly what constituted a playoff football team, and we weren't going to have any drama again, right? Actually, they kind of didn't have any problems. The 4 teams selected were the undefeated Clemson Tigers, the 1-loss Alabama Crimson Tide, the 1-loss Michigan State Spartans, and the 1-loss Oklahoma Sooners. At the time, the nation was fine with the selections, but the teams on the outside looking in weren't without their what-ifs. For starters, the Iowa Hawkeyes had a fairly strong argument for why they should have been put in the playoff. They had an undefeated year, albeit in the weaker Big Ten West, but they did have an interesting argument just before the conference championship weekend. Michigan State's only loss had come at the hands of Big Ten West Nebraska, and the Iowa State Hawkeyes took care of them during the regular season. The Hawkeyes would get their shot to prove they were the better team in the Big Ten championship and just narrowly lost to the Spartans. The Spartans would go on to get thumped by the Crimson Tide in the first round of the playoff, so it was kind of a moot point, but it would have been interesting if the ball had bounced the other way for the Hawkeyes. The only other interesting what-if of the selections was the talent displayed by the Stanford Cardinal, who boasted Christian McCaffrey. It's unlikely they would have had any better luck against Bama, considering they had a horrible loss to Northwestern earlier in the season, but if they had replaced the Spartans, maybe it would have been fun to see a player of McCaffrey's talent go against the Crimson Tide, and maybe they would have had some more success than the Michigan State Spartans. But it's not too much of a travesty that they were not in there. We will give this a only cope ranking on the scale. On to 2016, a fantastic year for the world. Maybe the last great year in American history, if you ask the people of the internet. While incredible artists such as Post Malone, Frank Ocean, The Weeknd, Drake, and Rihanna were dropping music, the Cubs were breaking the curse of the Billy Goat in the World Series, and the dab was raging across our culture. The College Football Committee, in the meantime, were selecting the undefeated Alabama Crimson Tide, the 1-loss Clemson Tigers, the 1-loss Washington Huskies, and the 1-loss Ohio State Buckeyes. At first, it looks like the committee got this one absolutely right. Can you believe it? 2 years in a row for these clowns? They must not be clowns anymore. Well, not quite. The biggest controversy hanging over the selections was the problem of Penn State and Ohio State. Penn State had 2 pretty bad losses during the season against a Pitt and a Michigan team, but they had put up a win against Ohio State. And with only 1 loss in conference, they had earned themselves a bid into the Big Ten Championship, where they had beaten the number 6 Wisconsin Badgers. Meanwhile, the Buckeyes had sat at home on their couch. Also, at home on their couch was the Michigan Wolverines, nursing their wounds after a heartbreaking 2-overtime loss to the Buckeyes. But the Wolverines had beaten both Penn State and Wisconsin in the regular season. If your head is starting to hurt, I'm pretty sure the committee's heads were as well. The Big Ten was not making it easy on anyone. Out of all the confusion, the playoff committee made an incredible statement by selecting the Buckeyes. By selecting the Buckeyes, the conference championship no longer mattered in their criteria. Despite what you wanted to say about any other past selection, they had all won their conference championship. This was a stunning admission by the committee and would send repercussions into the future. After getting skunked by the Clemson Tigers, the college football world couldn't help but wonder if Ohio State's selection was a result of bias and not of merit. The world was left to their imagination on what it would have been like to watch Saquon Barkley, one of the best college players of all time, take his shot against that championship Clemson team. It would have definitely been more interesting than the thumping that was put on a fraudulent Ohio State. I rank this a storm the CFP offices level of asterisk on my meter. 2017 rolled around, and each and every college football fan was now fully aware of the mess that they were getting themselves into each college football playoff selection day. This year was no different. The year may have been the most retroactively criticized selection in CFP history, and it was all because of one team, the UCF Golden Knights. Let's first look at the teams selected. There was the one-loss Crimson Tide, the one-loss Clemson Tigers, the one-loss Georgia Bulldogs, and the one-loss Oklahoma Sooners. Each one of these losses were brutal for their respective teams. The worst loss was Oklahoma, losing to an unranked Iowa State in Norman. The second worst was Clemson losing to Syracuse in New York. But the most interesting for our discussion was a commonality between the Georgia Bulldogs and the Crimson Tide. Both teams had lost to an Auburn team. In Georgia's case, getting blown out by more than 3 scores. Similarly, Alabama got blown out by 2 scores to that same Auburn team. Well, Georgia was able to redeem itself by beating Auburn in the SEC championship by a convincing margin. But I thought at this point conference championship games didn't matter. Ohio State had proven that last year. Now Alabama was sitting at home on its couch while Auburn was competing in the title game with only regular season losses to a playoff Clemson team by 8 and an LSU team by 3. Well, that put the committee in an interesting spot. If conference championship games didn't matter, then Auburn's loss to Georgia was meaningless, and Auburn was 1-0 against them. If championship games did matter, then Alabama was sitting at home and shouldn't get put into the playoff. You know what ultimately happened next? Georgia and Alabama were playing each other in the national title game. But wait, what about UCF? They had not lost a single game. The committee said, bite me. Have fun getting blown out by Auburn in the Peach Bowl. And UCF just proceeded to beat Auburn by a touchdown. What is the committee doing? Is there no shame amongst them? Now, one of the great what-ifs of college football history is what it would have looked like if Georgia or Alabama had gone up against that hungry UCF team. UCF thinks they know, as they now have crowned themselves national champions for that year. College football is awesome. For the first time in this video, I'm going to give this asterisk the death penalty ranking. Committee, you should be scared. 2018 came next, giving us 2 of the most dominant college football runs we have seen in the playoff era. Alabama and Clemson absolutely steamrolled into the playoff, both going undefeated, and it wasn't particularly close in any of their games. Alabama was Megatron, and Clemson was Optimus Prime if they had been placed in Michael Bay's universe. Any guy you put up against them to fight just got their shit rocked. There was really only one even matchup, and it was played against each other. Those lesser beasts that had to fight them were the Notre Dame Fighting Irish and the Oklahoma Sooners, each getting their doors blown off when they played the Titans of that year. Because of the dominance, the only real asterisk would again fall on the failure to include UCF, who completed another undefeated season. The only team that could have arguably been replaced by the Knights was the Oklahoma Sooners, who lost to the number 19 ranked Texas Longhorns. The Sooners would atone for this loss in the Big 12 championship right before college football playoff selection. The Texas Longhorns were not a great team, losing surprisingly to Maryland and Oklahoma State, but they were a better team than UCF's best win against the number 24 Cincinnati Bearcats. Still, UCF was undefeated for 2 years in a row. There is no telling what they could have possibly done if they had been given the chance. I rank this as SportsCenter headline on the meter. 2019, one of the craziest seasons in recent memory because of the nuclear bomb that wiped every team it played off the face of the earth. This was the LSU Tigers. If Alabama and Clemson the year prior were Optimus Prime and Megatron, destined for a heavyweight fight to decide a champion, the LSU Tigers were Jaegers from Pacific Rim. Colossal juggernauts that may have been the best team ever assembled in college football history. The unfortunate souls that were tasked with competing in the same bracket were the undefeated Ohio State Buckeyes, the undefeated Clemson Tigers, and the one-loss Oklahoma Sooners. This may have been the most chalk playoff selection in the history of the CFP. Clemson looked like a buzzsaw in their own right, cruising through their schedule for the second year in a row. Ohio State never faltered in their conference and had Clemson on the ropes in their playoff matchup. The only argument that could be made was that Oklahoma could have been replaced by another team. Some fans wanted to see a rematch with Alabama versus the Tigers, as they were the only team that appeared to be in LSU's weight class that entire year. Unfortunately, the Tide lost in the Iron Bowl, and the matchup was never able to happen. If the Tide could have matched up with the Tigers again, maybe Nick Saban could have learned enough to knock them off, but I highly doubt it, and I will not reward them for being a 2-loss team. Fans can dream, though. I give this asterisk only cope on the meter. 2020 is immediately given an asterisk because of COVID-19. It's kind of a throwaway year in my opinion. Nothing was normal about the entire world, so there is no way college football would be spared from the bizarreness. Most of the teams didn't even play a full schedule. Teams that did play had inflated rankings, no one knew how good each other were, crowds were limited, etc. There is no way this is a legitimate championship. This has one of the biggest asterisks through no fault of its own. Sorry, Saban, this one just doesn't mean more. I rank this as death penalty on the asterisk rating, but it's not really the committee's fault. It's just how the world was. 2021, we begin to return to normalcy. This year had the only appearance of a team not from the Power 5 ranks, as the Cincinnati Bearcats achieved an undefeated season. Along with the Bearcats, the Georgia Bulldogs had an undefeated regular season, but lost to the Crimson Tide in the SEC Championship, which I thought wasn't supposed to matter. The Crimson Tide and the Michigan Wolverines both joined the dance with only one loss. Both losses being surprises, as the Tide fell to a disappointing Texas A&M Aggie team, and the Wolverines fell to the then number 8 ranked Michigan State Spartans. At this selection, you could hear the screams of horror from UCF faithful as their AAC foes made it to the playoff while they had been ignored for 2 years. Only the College Football Playoff Committee would come up with a way to give a team the middle finger as hard as they did to UCF. In terms of snubs, by the logic the committee had followed to this point, Notre Dame should have gotten in over Michigan or Alabama. The only regular season loss that Notre Dame had suffered was to Cincinnati, another team in the playoff. Meanwhile, Bama lost to a Texas A&M squad that lost to Mississippi State, LSU, Arkansas, and Ole Miss. Not exactly a team dominating in the conference. Michigan also lost to a Michigan State team that lost to Purdue. I don't even have to mention the other teams because that says enough about how Michigan State's season finished. Notre Dame won who was put in front of them, other than a playoff team. Notre Dame could have taken the 4th spot and bumped Cincinnati up to the 3 spot, switching Cincinnati to a matchup with the Bulldogs while the Fighting Irish took on Alabama. Cincinnati probably is happier that they didn't have to play the imposing Bulldogs. But it would have been interesting to see if Brian Kelly would have been able to come up with something in another postseason matchup with Nick Saban. I don't think the championship would have ended any differently, but I think Notre Dame would have challenged the Tide more. I rank this as being viral on the message boards. 2022 was one of my favorite seasons in recent memory. This was in large part because of the awesome play of the TCU Horned Frogs, who went undefeated in the regular season. Competing against them in the playoffs was a return of the Michigan Wolverines, who dominated their conference the entire year. The Buckeyes, whose only loss came against the Wolverines, and the Georgia Bulldogs, who imposed their will physically on every team, finishing with an undefeated record as well. There was no asterisk to be added because of the committee this year. Even a broken clock is right twice a day. The only asterisk could be pulled from the game between Ohio State and Georgia, where, at the literal stroke of midnight, the field goal attempt from the Buckeyes drifted wide and Georgia escaped by the skin of their teeth. In my opinion, I don't think the Buckeyes were a talented enough team to be in that game, but Georgia played one of their worst games of the year. I think if that field goal had gone through the uprights, TCU may have had a better shot at beating the Buckeyes. Despite being a fun hypothetical, this was a small asterisk, ranking as only cope on the meter. Well, if you had any faith in the committee after their 22 performance, your goodwill was stomped out, set on fire, and thrown into the dumpster as they again completely disregarded and threw out their ranking criteria. 2023 was one of the tightest races for a spot in the playoff in recent memory, with the Michigan Wolverines completing an undefeated season despite a sign-stealing and recruiting controversy hanging over the program. The Washington Huskies completed an undefeated season, the Texas Longhorns completed a 1-loss season, and the Crimson Tide finished with 1 loss on their resume. But wait, am I reading that right? There was an undefeated team who also won their conference championship game that didn't make it into the playoff. That can't be right, says the viewer. Oh, it can. and the committee did. After all of the missteps and the outright disrespect we have chronicled in this video, this was the worst. 2014, Ohio State had set the precedent. If you won your games, but your quarterback was injured, you still would get the opportunity to compete. Not in Florida State's case. Citing exclusively the injury to the quarterback, the committee explained that it was within their power to not admit a team who had lost a key player. Unless you're the darling Ohio State 9 years prior. This single choice altered the playoff forever, and is probably the biggest reason we now have a 14-team playoff, other than those pesky TV networks. Anyway, the college football world was stunned as the Tide stole the Seminoles spot. Shocker again, a college football darling gets preferential treatment despite a worse record. In a world where the committee gets it right, the seeding would have gone Wolverines, Huskies, Seminoles, and then Georgia Bulldogs. As we have seen time and time again, the committee doesn't respect the conference championship. Unless you fit into their agenda. Apparently, Georgia didn't fit their agenda, and losing to the Tide in the SEC championship was enough to send them packing. They should have been the fourth team. Most likely, it would have been Michigan versus Georgia in the national championship, and we would have had an epic showdown. This has got to be ranked as death penalty on our meter. Reeling from the blowback, but falling back into piles and piles of money from TV networks, the committee decided to expand the playoff, opening up the pool to 12 teams in the 2024 season. Making up the 2024 playoff bracket was the undefeated Oregon Ducks, the 2-loss Georgia Bulldogs, the 1-loss Boise State Broncos, the 2-loss Arizona State Sun Devils, the 1 regular season loss Texas Longhorns, the 1 regular season loss Penn State Nittany Lions, the 1-loss Notre Dame Fighting Irish, the 2-loss Ohio State Buckeyes, the 2-loss Tennessee Volunteers, the 1-loss Indiana Hoosiers, the 1 regular season loss SMU Mustangs, and the 3 regular season loss Clemson Tigers. Man, the intros for 2024 and 2025 are like reading a Tim Robinson sketch, except we don't get to pass along the bill to the next person, and we don't get 55 hot dogs, 55 hamburgers, etc. With the 12-team playoff, it felt like almost none of the previous rules applied. The committee had no decision on conference title games being valid or not, as each winner would get an automatic bid. This, unfortunately, allowed a trash can of a team in the Clemson Tigers to get a spot in the dance. This also made it an interesting decision for the committee to make on the Buckeyes, as they lost to their conference champs and lost to a horrible Michigan team. The Big 12 was debatedly snubbed as an SMU team that had lost to the BYU Cougars made it into the dance over the 2-loss Cougars. In my opinion, the Cougars would have been a much better opponent for the Nittany Lions than the Mustangs ended up being. Another huge what-if from this tournament was whether it would have been better for the Oregon Ducks to lose a game during their season. They got the unfortunate draw of playing Ohio State off the bye game, raising some causes for concern against the positivity of winning your conference, as every other bye team also lost their first game. The most frustrating committee selection, in my opinion, was the inclusion of the Fighting Irish in the tournament at all. In the second game of the year, the Irish lost to an FCS team. An FCS team. Are we joking here? This team didn't even end up being good in their own league, losing a whopping 5 games. Are we joking? How were the Irish allowed to play in the tournament? Without the name brand, they would have never made it into the college football playoff. This spot should have gone to the BYU Cougars. I'm giving this a Storm the CFP office's ranking on the meter. We have finally made it to the most recent CFP, the 2025 college football playoff. This was an epic bracket, giving us the most unlikely rise to a championship status with the perfect 16-0 season of the Indiana Hoosiers. Filling out the rest of the bracket was the regular season undefeated Buckeyes, the 1-loss Bulldogs, the 1-loss Texas Tech Red Raiders, the 1-loss Oregon Ducks, the 1-loss Ole Miss Rebels, the 1-loss Texas A&M Aggies, the 2-loss Oklahoma Sooners, the 2-loss Crimson Tide, the 2-loss Miami Hurricanes, the 2-loss Tulane Green Wave, the 1-loss James Madison Dukes. Whew. Once again, it was another year of the BYU Cougars getting snubbed out of a playoff spot. The committee proved they did not care about conference championship games, as the Tide were ranked behind their 2-loss conference peers, Oklahoma, giving them no points for playing in the game. It was actually completely nonsensical to include the Hurricanes, despite their run to the Natty. They had lost to 2 disappointing teams in SMU and Louisville, beating no one of relevance. Notre Dame does not count as being relevant. They lost to the only viable resume builders on their schedule. BYU, on the other hand, had beat everyone other than the 4th-ranked football team in the country. If they disregard the conference championship in the SEC, they should have disregarded the championship in the Big 12. The losses on paper were worse for both Bama and Oklahoma, and the SEC still wormed in their piss-poor teams into the playoff. I would have dropped Bama and inserted BYU into the 9 spot, and I would have bet on the Cougars beating the Sooners. The asterisk overall, however, was fairly minimal. You could not hold anything over these champions. The Indiana Hoosiers freaking rock. I'm going to give the rating SportsCenter headline. The big takeaway from the video is that it is stupid to have idiots who don't watch ball making all of the decisions in ranking these teams. The only thing that should determine college football destiny should be the play on the field. I want to live in a world where my team eventually lets me down in horrible fashion, not some department head or commissioner. We need to abolish the bureaucracy. Anyway, hope you had a good time. Like and subscribe.
Experts, Bob! Exploiting every loophole, dodging every obstacle. They're penetrating the bureaucracy!